In the world of modern warfare and espionage, technology has become the ultimate equalizer. Satellites guide missiles with pinpoint accuracy, drones eliminate targets from thousands of miles away, and sophisticated surveillance systems can track a single person across entire continents. But what happens when all of that technology suddenly goes dark? When the screens turn black, the communications die, and the most advanced operative in the world finds himself armed with nothing but his bare hands and decades of forgotten skills. This is the true account of Marcus Chen, a 42-year-old intelligence operative, who was considered obsolete by his own agency until the night of September 15, 2019. On that night, in a heavily fortified compound in Eastern Europe, Marcus would prove that sometimes the most primitive methods are the most effective. What should have been a simple extraction mission supported by cutting-edge technology became a masterclass in old-school tradecraft when an electromagnetic pulse disabled every piece of electronic equipment for miles. 50 armed guards stood between Marcus and his objective. No night vision, no communication with headquarters, no GPS tracking, no backup. Just one man, trained in methods that intelligence agencies had largely abandoned in favor of digital warfare, about to demonstrate why human skill and instinct can never be completely replaced by machines. This is the story of the longest night in Marcus Chen's career, and how he reminded the world that before there were satellites and computers, there were shadows and silence. Marcus Chen had always been different from other operatives. While his colleagues relied heavily on the latest gadgets and digital tools, Marcus preferred to trust his instincts and the skills his grandfather had taught him as a child. His grandfather, a former Chinese Special Forces soldier, had trained Marcus in ancient techniques of stealth, combat, and survival that most modern soldiers had never heard of. At 42, Marcus was considered by many in the intelligence community to be past his prime. The younger operatives called him old school behind his back, not always as a compliment. They carried tablets loaded with building schematics, wore contact lenses that could record everything they saw, and used earpieces that connected them instantly to support teams around the world. Marcus carried a simple knife, wore black clothing, and trusted his ability to read people and situations. The mission briefing on September 14th seemed routine enough. Dr. Elena Volkov, a brilliant nuclear physicist, had been kidnapped by a criminal organization led by Viktor Kozlov, a former Russian military officer who now sold weapons and information to the highest bidder. Elena had been working on clean energy technology that could revolutionize power generation, but in the wrong hands her research could easily be weaponized. The compound where Elena was being held sat on a hill overlooking a small valley in Moldova, near the Ukrainian border. Intelligence reports indicated approximately 50 guards patrolling the facility, which consisted of a main building, 2 smaller outbuildings, and a network of underground tunnels. The guards were well-trained former military personnel, equipped with automatic weapons, night vision equipment, and a sophisticated alarm system connected to the local police force. Marcus studied the satellite images and thermal readings that his technical support team had prepared. The facility looked impenetrable, at least by conventional standards. The main building was 3 stories tall, with reinforced concrete walls and bulletproof windows. Guard towers at each corner provided overlapping fields of fire across the entire compound. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and pressure plates created multiple layers of detection that would alert the guards to any intruder. His handler, Director Sarah Walsh, had assembled a support team that represented the best of modern intelligence technology. From a mobile command center parked 10 miles away, they would monitor Marcus through a tiny camera embedded in his collar, guide him using real-time satellite imagery, and coordinate his extraction once he found Elena. Backup teams were positioned at strategic points around the valley, ready to provide assistance if the mission went wrong. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would approach the compound from the east, where the hillside provided natural cover. Using a small explosive device, he would create a distraction on the opposite side of the facility while simultaneously cutting through the perimeter fence. Advanced jamming equipment would temporarily disable the compound's communication systems, preventing the guards from calling for reinforcements. Night vision goggles and thermal imaging would allow Marcus to navigate the building while avoiding patrols. Everything that could be planned had been planned. Every contingency had been considered. The mission had a 97% probability of success, according to the computer models. Marcus felt uneasy as he prepared his equipment. Something about the mission bothered him, though. He couldn't identify exactly what it was. Perhaps it was the way the intelligence had come together too easily, or the fact that Kozlov's organization had never operated in this region before. During his 20-year career, Marcus had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that something was wrong. He decided to deviate from the standard equipment loadout, Instead of carrying the heavy night vision goggles and electronic communications gear, Marcus packed light: a simple black outfit, soft-soled boots, his grandfather's combat knife, a length of thin rope, and a small mirror for signaling. His colleagues thought he was being reckless, but Marcus had survived this long by trusting his gut. The insertion went according to plan. Marcus parachuted into the valley at 11:30 p.m., landing softly in a field about 2 miles from the compound. The mobile command center immediately established contact, and Director Walsh's voice crackled through his earpiece as he gathered his parachute and began moving toward the target. The night was unusually dark, with heavy clouds blocking the moon and stars. Marcus moved through the forest with the silent efficiency that had made him legendary among those who knew his work. He had learned to walk without disturbing leaves or breaking branches, to control his breathing so that it made no sound, and to move his body in a way that seemed to flow rather than step. As he approached the compound, Marcus could see the guard towers silhouetted against the sky. Searchlights swept back and forth across the perimeter, their beams cutting through the darkness in predictable patterns. He counted the guards visible from his position and noted their equipment. Everything matched the intelligence reports perfectly. Too perfectly, Marcus realized. In his experience, intelligence reports were never completely accurate. There were always small discrepancies, minor details that didn't match the reality on the ground. But this compound looked exactly like the satellite photos, down to the smallest detail. It was as if someone had arranged everything specifically to match the briefing materials. Marcus was about to radio his concerns to the command center when the world suddenly went white. The electromagnetic pulse hit without warning, a massive wave of energy that swept across the valley like an invisible tsunami. Every electronic device within a 10-mile radius died instantly. Marcus's earpiece went silent, his backup radio failed to respond, and somewhere behind him he knew that the mobile command center had just gone dark. For a moment Marcus lay motionless on the ground, his vision slowly returning after the brilliant flash. Around the compound he could see guards stumbling in confusion as their night vision equipment failed and their radios went dead. Emergency lighting systems flickered and died, plunging the facility into almost complete darkness. Marcus smiled grimly as he realized what had happened. Someone had detonated an electromagnetic pulse device, probably from inside the compound itself. It was a trap, designed to lure an operative into a situation where all of his modern equipment would be useless. But whoever had planned the trap had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that Marcus would be helpless without his technology. Instead, Marcus felt more comfortable than he had in years. The darkness was his friend, the silence was his ally, and the confused guards stumbling around the compound were about to learn why the old ways sometimes worked better than the new ones. Marcus began to move toward the compound with renewed confidence. The guards would be disoriented and partially night-blind from their failed equipment. They would be trying to coordinate using hand signals and whispers, which would make them easier to detect and avoid. Most importantly, they would be thinking like modern soldiers, relying on tactics and strategies that assumed the availability of electronic support. Marcus, on the other hand, was thinking like his grandfather, who had once infiltrated an entire enemy camp, using nothing but patience, silence, and an understanding of how people behaved when they were afraid. The first guard tower came into view as Marcus crept through the tall grass near the perimeter fence. He could see 2 guards at the top, both struggling with binoculars and trying to spot movement in the darkness below. Their body language told Marcus everything he needed to know about their state of mind. They were nervous, frustrated, and beginning to panic as they realized that their sophisticated security system had been reduced to a collection of useless metal and plastic. Marcus had dealt with frightened guards before. They made predictable mistakes, concentrated too hard on obvious threats while ignoring subtle ones, and often created opportunities for a skilled infiltrator by abandoning their posts to investigate suspicious sounds or movements. He picked up a small stone and threw it toward a tree about 50 yards away from the guard tower. The stone struck the trunk with a soft thud that was just loud enough to be noticed but not loud enough to be clearly identified. As expected, both guards turned toward the sound, raising their binoculars and straining to see what had caused the disturbance. While their attention was focused on the tree, Marcus sprinted silently across the open ground, between his hiding place and the perimeter fence. He reached the chain-link barrier without being detected and began examining the base where it met the ground. The fence was designed to keep out vehicles and large groups of people, not a single individual who knew how to exploit its weaknesses. Marcus found what he was looking for near a drainage culvert where rainwater had washed away some of the soil beneath the fence. Using his knife, he carefully widened the gap until it was just large enough for him to squeeze through. The work took nearly 10 minutes, but he moved patiently and methodically, knowing that haste would only increase his chances of making a mistake. Once inside the perimeter, Marcus found himself in a different world. The compound was much larger than it had appeared in the satellite photographs, with additional buildings and structures that hadn't shown up in the intelligence reports. More importantly, he could see that the guards were not the typical hired security personnel that the briefing had described. These men moved with military precision even in the darkness, and their weapons and equipment were far more sophisticated than anything a criminal organization should have been able to afford. Marcus realized that he had walked into something much more complex than a simple kidnapping. This wasn't Viktor Kozlov's operation at all. The entire scenario had been designed to lure him here, to test his abilities under conditions where his technological advantages would be neutralized. But who had the resources and motivation to create such an elaborate trap? The answer came to him as he studied the guards' movements and recognized their tactical formations. These were government operatives, probably Russian Spetsnaz or a similar elite unit. Someone in the intelligence community had decided that Marcus Chen needed to be eliminated, and they had chosen to do it in a way that would make his death look like the result of a failed mission. Instead of being discouraged by this realization, Marcus felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. He had been in situations like this before, though never quite on this scale. 50 highly trained soldiers wanted him dead, and he had no backup, no communication with the outside world, and no electronic equipment to level the playing field. It was exactly the kind of challenge that Marcus lived for. He began to move through the compound like a ghost, using shadows and cover to avoid detection while he gathered information about his enemies. The guards were good, but they were thinking like soldiers defending a position rather than hunters tracking prey. They established overlapping fields of observation, maintained radio discipline even though their radios weren't working, and followed standard procedures for security in a compromised situation. Marcus, however, was thinking like a predator. He studied the guards' patrol patterns, identified their blind spots, and began to understand the rhythm of their movements. More importantly, he started to recognize the signs of stress and fatigue that would give him opportunities to strike. The mission had changed completely from what he had expected, but Marcus felt more alive than he had in months. This wasn't about rescuing Dr. Bolkov anymore, though he still hoped to find her if she was actually being held in the compound. This had become a personal challenge, a test of everything his grandfather had taught him about survival and combat. 50 guards stood between Marcus and whatever answers lay inside the main building. He had no weapons except his knife, no technology except his training, and no support except his own skill and determination. It was time to show these modern soldiers what old school really meant. Marcus spent the first hour after infiltrating the compound simply observing. His grandfather had taught him that patience was the most important weapon a soldier could possess, more valuable than any gun or explosive device. While the guards grew increasingly anxious in the darkness, Marcus remained perfectly still, hidden behind a maintenance shed where he could watch the patrol patterns without being detected. The compound's layout was more complex than the intelligence briefings had indicated. The main building sat in the center, surrounded by 6 smaller structures that appeared to house equipment, supplies, and living quarters for the guards. Underground tunnels connected several of the buildings, creating a network that would allow defenders to move reinforcements quickly from one location to another. Marcus counted 53 guards total, slightly more than the reported 50. They were organized into teams of 4 or 5, with each team responsible for a specific sector of the compound. Radio silence had forced them to rely on visual signals and predetermined patrol routes, which made their movements predictable but also meant that any disturbance would quickly alert multiple teams. The guards were armed with AK-74 assault rifles, sidearms, and grenades. Several teams carried night vision equipment that had been rendered useless by the electromagnetic pulse, but they also had backup flashlights and flares for emergency situations. Their body armor and tactical gear indicated professional military training, confirming Marcus's suspicion that this was not a typical criminal operation. As Marcus studied the guards' behavior, he began to identify individual personalities and weaknesses. The team leader near the main entrance was nervous and kept checking his watch, suggesting that he was expecting something to happen at a specific time.
2 guards stationed at the rear of the compound were smoking cigarettes and talking in low voices, which indicated poor discipline and distraction.
A lone sentry in the northeast corner appeared to be struggling to stay awake, occasionally nodding off before jerking himself back to alertness.
These observations gave Marcus the information he needed to begin his campaign of elimination. He would start with the isolated guards and work his way toward the center of the compound, reducing the overall numbers while creating confusion and fear among the survivors. The key was to make each elimination look like an accident or natural occurrence, at least initially, so that the guards wouldn't realize they were under attack until it was too late to mount an effective defense. Marcus's first target was the drowsy sentry in the northeast corner. The guard was positioned behind a concrete barrier that provided excellent cover from external threats but also isolated him from his colleagues. More importantly, the guard's position was downwind from Marcus, which would prevent him from detecting any unusual scents. Moving like a shadow, Marcus crept closer to the sentry's position. He had learned to control not only his footsteps, but also his breathing, heartbeat, and even the sound of his clothing rustling in the breeze. The techniques required intense concentration and physical discipline, but they allowed him to become virtually invisible to human senses. The sentry was indeed falling asleep, his chin dropping toward his chest before snapping back up every few minutes. Marcus waited patiently for the right moment, then moved forward in one fluid motion. His left hand covered the guard's mouth while his right hand applied pressure to a specific point on the man's neck, cutting off blood flow to the brain. The sentry lost consciousness within seconds and would remain unconscious for at least an hour. Marcus quickly dragged the unconscious guard behind the concrete barrier and secured him with plastic zip ties from the man's own equipment. He stripped off the guard's radio headset, tactical vest, and weapon, then carefully arranged the scene to make it appear that the sentry had simply abandoned his post. From a distance, other guards would assume their colleague had left his position to investigate something or to use the bathroom. The second elimination was more challenging. The two guards at the rear of the compound were talking and smoking, which meant they were alert and facing each other. Marcus needed to neutralize both simultaneously to prevent one from raising an alarm. He spent 20 minutes working his way into position, moving from cover to cover while avoiding the patrol routes of other guard teams. The darkness helped, but Marcus relied primarily on his ability to read the micro-movements and body language of people who didn't know they were being watched. The smoking guards were discussing their families back home, complaining about the cold weather and speculating about why their electronic equipment had failed. Their conversation revealed that they were not regular soldiers, but contract operators hired for this specific mission. More importantly, they mentioned that the operation was scheduled to conclude at dawn, which gave Marcus roughly 5 hours to complete his own mission. Marcus approached from directly behind the guards, using a damaged section of fence as cover. When both men turned away from him to look at something in the distance, he struck simultaneously. The guard on the left received a precise blow to the base of his skull that rendered him unconscious instantly, while the guard on the right was immobilized by a chokehold that cut off his air supply without damaging his windpipe. Both men were unconscious within 30 seconds. Marcus quickly secured them with their own equipment and hid their bodies behind a pile of construction materials. He took their ammunition and grenades but left their weapons behind, knowing that gunfire would immediately alert every guard in the compound. The third elimination required more creativity. Marcus had identified a guard who was patrolling alone between two of the smaller buildings, following a predictable route that took him past a maintenance area filled with pipes, cables, and construction equipment. The guard was professional and alert, but he was also following a routine that made him vulnerable to someone who understood the psychology of repetitive tasks. Marcus positioned himself along the guard's patrol route and waited. When the guard approached, Marcus made a small sound that was just unusual enough to attract attention without seeming threatening. The guard paused, looked toward the sound, and took 2 steps closer to investigate. That was exactly what Marcus had expected. People investigating unknown sounds almost always moved toward the source rather than away from it, and they typically moved slowly and cautiously, which made them easier to approach without being detected. As the guard stepped closer to the maintenance area, Marcus rose silently from behind a stack of pipes and applied a sleeper hold that rendered the man unconscious within seconds. The technique required precise pressure on the carotid arteries to cut off blood flow to the brain without damaging the guard's neck or throat. Marcus was now operating on a timeline that he controlled, rather than reacted to. Each successful elimination made the remaining guards more vulnerable by reducing their numbers and creating gaps in their security coverage. More importantly, the missing guards would eventually be noticed, which would cause confusion and force the remaining men to alter their patrol patterns. The fourth and fifth eliminations came in quick succession. Marcus had identified 2 guards who were stationed at opposite ends of a walkway that connected the main building to one of the smaller structures. The men were supposed to maintain visual contact with each other, but the distance and darkness made this difficult. Marcus approached the first guard from behind while the man was focused on trying to see his partner at the other end of the walkway. A precise strike to a nerve cluster at the base of the guard's neck caused immediate paralysis and unconsciousness. Marcus lowered the man to the ground and quickly moved toward the second guard, who was still trying to peer through the darkness. The second guard became suspicious when his partner didn't respond to a hand signal. He began walking toward the first guard's position, which brought him directly into Marcus's path. Marcus waited until the guard was focused on looking ahead, then struck from the side with a technique that rendered the man unconscious without making any noise. By this point, Marcus had eliminated 5 guards and acquired additional ammunition, grenades, and tactical equipment. More importantly, he had created several gaps in the compound's security perimeter that would allow him to move more freely between the buildings. The 6th elimination was the most dangerous yet. Marcus had identified the guard team's communication specialist, a man who was responsible for trying to restore radio contact with the outside world. The specialist was working alone in a small building, filled with electronic equipment, desperately attempting to repair the damage caused by the electromagnetic pulse. Marcus knew that eliminating the communications specialist would prevent the guards from calling for reinforcements, but it would also require him to enter a building where he could be trapped if discovered. The risk was significant, but the tactical advantage was too important to ignore. Marcus approached the communications building from the side where there were no windows. Using his knife, he carefully pried open a ventilation grate that provided access to the building's interior. The space was cramped, but Marcus had trained in confined environments and knew how to move silently through narrow spaces. The communications specialist was so focused on his equipment that he didn't notice Marcus drop silently from the ventilation system. The man was surrounded by damaged radios, computers, and satellite communication devices, all of which had been rendered inoperable by the electromagnetic pulse. His frustration was evident in his body language and muttered curses. Marcus approached from behind and applied a sleeper hold that rendered the specialist unconscious within seconds. He then spent several minutes examining the communication equipment to confirm that none of it could be repaired quickly enough to effect his mission. Satisfied that the guards would remain isolated, Marcus exited the building through the same ventilation grate he had used to enter. 7th through 10th eliminations followed a similar pattern. Marcus had identified a 4-man patrol team that was responsible for checking the perimeter fence and investigating any suspicious sounds or movements. The team moved in a diamond formation that provided good security against external threats but created opportunities for someone operating inside the compound. Marcus shadowed the patrol team for an entire circuit of their route, learning their habits and identifying moments when individual guards were temporarily separated from their colleagues. When the team paused to investigate a sound near the eastern fence, Marcus struck. The rear guard was eliminated first, with a silent takedown that left him unconscious behind a maintenance shed. Marcus then moved to the left flank guard, who was focused on watching the perimeter and didn't notice the approach from behind. The 3rd guard was eliminated when he turned to check on his missing colleagues, and the 4th guard was rendered unconscious before he could understand what was happening to his team. 4 more guards were now out of action, and Marcus had acquired additional tactical equipment including night vision goggles that still functioned despite the electromagnetic pulse. The goggles had been stored in a shielded case that protected them from the energy wave, giving Marcus a significant advantage over the remaining guards who were still operating in darkness. The 11th through 15th eliminations required a change in tactics. Marcus had reduced the guard force significantly, but the remaining men were becoming suspicious about their missing colleagues. He could hear whispered conversations and see guards checking positions that should have been occupied. Marcus decided to accelerate his timeline by using the guards' own fears against them. Instead of continuing with silent eliminations, he began creating psychological pressure that would cause the remaining guards to make mistakes. He started by leaving subtle evidence that someone was moving through the compound. A cigarette butt placed where a missing guard should have been standing, a piece of equipment moved from its original location, footprints in the dirt that led from one abandoned post to another. These signs were designed to suggest that the missing guards had been taken rather than killed, which would create uncertainty and fear among the survivors. The psychological campaign worked exactly as Marcus had intended. The remaining guards began abandoning their assigned positions to search for their missing colleagues, breaking their formation and creating opportunities for additional eliminations. More importantly, their fear and confusion made them less observant and more likely to walk into traps. Marcus eliminated 5 more guards over the next hour using techniques that combined stealth with psychological manipulation. He would create a sound that attracted attention and strike when guards came to investigate. He used their own equipment against them, turning their flashlights into beacons that revealed their positions while blinding them to threats approaching from the darkness. 20 guards were now eliminated, leaving 30 men to defend a compound that had been designed to require 50. The security perimeter had multiple gaps, the patrol schedules had been disrupted, and the remaining guards were operating under increasing stress and fear. Marcus paused to assess his situation and plan the next phase of his operation. He had successfully reduced the guard force by 40% without raising a general alarm, but the remaining men were now actively searching for the source of their problems. The element of surprise was diminishing, and Marcus would need to adapt his tactics accordingly. The compound's main building still held whatever secrets had prompted this elaborate trap, and Marcus was now closer than ever to discovering the truth about his mission. But 33 highly trained soldiers still stood between him and his objective, and some of them were beginning to understand that they were under attack by a single, highly skilled operator. The most dangerous phase of the mission was about to begin. The remaining 33 guards had finally realized they were under attack. Marcus could hear urgent whispered conversations and see the beam patterns of flashlights as teams began conducting systematic searches of areas where their colleagues had disappeared. The professional discipline that had initially worked against them was now being used more effectively as the survivors consolidated their positions and established overlapping fields of observation. Marcus knew that his tactics would have to evolve as well. The silent elimination phase of his operation had been successful, but continuing with the same approach would eventually lead to his discovery and capture. 20 guards were neutralized, but 30 copies remained, and these survivors were now actively hunting him. From his concealed position behind a generator housing, Marcus studied the new defensive arrangement that the guards had established. They had pulled back from the perimeter and concentrated around the main building, creating a tighter security zone that would be much more difficult to penetrate. 4-man teams were positioned at each corner of the building, with roving patrols filling the gaps between fixed positions. The guard commander, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his left cheek, had taken personal control of the situation. Marcus watched as the commander moved between positions, reorganizing his men and establishing new communication protocols using hand signals and light patterns. The man was clearly experienced in combat operations and understood that he was facing a highly skilled opponent. Marcus realized that his advantage now lay not in stealth but in mobility and unpredictability. The guards were expecting him to continue trying to infiltrate their positions, but instead, he would force them to come to him by creating threats that demanded immediate response. The compound's fuel storage area provided the perfect opportunity. Marcus had identified several large fuel tanks that supplied power to the compound's generators and heating systems. A fire or explosion in this area would create chaos and force the guards to choose between maintaining security around the main building and preventing a disaster that could destroy the entire facility. Moving carefully through the shadows, Marcus approached the fuel storage area from the blind spot he had identified during his initial reconnaissance. The area was guarded by a 2-man team positioned about 50 meters away. Close enough to observe the tanks, but far enough to avoid being caught in an explosion if something went wrong. Marcus knew that he couldn't eliminate the guards without alerting their colleagues, but he didn't need to. Instead, he needed to create a convincing threat that would draw defenders away from the main building, while giving himself an opportunity to strike at multiple targets simultaneously. Using materials from his tactical kit and supplies found around the compound, Marcus constructed 3 improvised incendiary devices. The devices were designed to create spectacular fires rather than devastating explosions, maximizing visual impact while minimizing the risk of actually destroying the fuel tanks. His goal was to create fear and confusion, not to cause a catastrophic explosion that might kill innocent people if Dr. Volkov was actually being held in the compound. Marcus placed the first device near a fuel line that connected the storage tanks to the main building. The second device was positioned next to a small pump house that regulated fuel flow throughout the compound. The third device was hidden beneath a maintenance platform where spilled fuel had created a highly flammable environment. He triggered the devices simultaneously using a timing mechanism created from his wristwatch and some electrical wire salvaged from the communications building. The result was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. 3 separate fires that appeared to threaten the entire fuel storage system. The psychological impact was immediate and dramatic. Guards throughout the compound began shouting warnings about fire and explosion, and the commander was forced to send teams to investigate and control the blazes. Most importantly, the guards' night vision was destroyed by the bright flames, while Marcus remained in the darkness beyond the light. As expected, the guard commander sent 12 men to deal with the fuel storage emergency. This reduced the defensive force around the main building to 21 guards, and created opportunities for Marcus to eliminate isolated teams that had been separated from their colleagues. The first opportunity came when a 4-man team was dispatched to investigate the pump house fire. The team approached cautiously, spreading out in a diamond formation that provided good security against conventional attacks but created vulnerabilities that Marcus could exploit. Marcus had positioned himself in an elevated position on a nearby building where he could observe the team's approach. When the guards reached the pump house, they discovered that the fire was contained and posed no immediate threat to the fuel storage system. As they began to investigate the source of the blaze, Marcus struck. He dropped silently from his elevated position onto the rear guard, rendering the man unconscious before his colleagues realized what was happening. The remaining 3 guards turned toward the sound of their fallen comrade, but Marcus was already moving to his next target. The second guard was eliminated with a precise strike to a pressure point that caused immediate paralysis and unconsciousness. The third guard managed to raise his weapon, but Marcus had anticipated this reaction and was already behind cover when the man fired. The gunshot echoed across the compound, alerting every remaining guard to Marcus's location. But the sound also masked the approach that Marcus was making on the fourth guard, who was focused on trying to spot the source of movement in the shadows. Marcus eliminated the fourth guard with a technique that his grandfather had taught him, using the man's own momentum and body weight to render him unconscious without making any additional noise. 4 more guards were now neutralized, bringing Marcus's total to 24 eliminations. The gunshot had changed the dynamic of the entire operation. The remaining guards now knew exactly where Marcus had been, and they were converging on his position with overwhelming force. But Marcus had anticipated this reaction and was already implementing the next phase of his plan. Instead of trying to escape from the area around the pump house, Marcus moved deeper into the fuel storage facility. The maze of pipes, tanks, and maintenance equipment provided excellent cover and concealment, but more importantly, it forced the pursuing guards to split up and search for him in small groups. The pursuing guards made the mistake that Marcus had been hoping for. Instead of maintaining unit cohesion and searching methodically, they spread out to cover more ground and prevent Marcus from escaping. This decision turned their numerical advantage into a series of individual confrontations where Marcus's superior skills could be decisive. The first pursuing guard entered the fuel storage maze alone, following what appeared to be Marcus's trail through the narrow spaces between the storage tanks. Marcus was waiting above the man's head, balanced on a network of pipes that provided both concealment and a tactical advantage. When the guard passed beneath him, Marcus dropped down and applied a sleeper hold that rendered the man unconscious within seconds. 25 guards eliminated. The second guard was more cautious, moving slowly and checking corners before advancing. But his caution worked against him by making his movements predictable. Marcus was able to position himself in the guard's path and eliminate him with a single precise strike. 26 guards eliminated. The third and fourth guards entered the maze together, maintaining visual contact while they searched for Marcus. This tactical decision was sound, but it required them to move through narrow spaces where they couldn't fully utilize their numerical advantage. Marcus waited until both guards were committed to a passage between 2 large fuel tanks, then blocked their retreat by triggering a small fire behind them. The guards were forced to continue forward, directly into Marcus's prepared position. The first guard was eliminated with a technique that used his own forward momentum against him, while the second guard was rendered unconscious before he could react to his partner's fate. 28 guards eliminated. Marcus now faced a critical decision. 26 guards remained, and most of them were converging on the fuel storage area where the firefight had begun. The fire system falls. He could continue eliminating individual guards, but the remaining men were becoming increasingly organized and would soon establish a perimeter that would be difficult to escape. Instead of continuing the battle in the fuel storage area, Marcus decided to take the fight directly to the main building. The guard commander had kept his strongest teams around the building's entrances, but he had also pulled men away from those positions to deal with the fuel storage crisis. Marcus used the network of underground tunnels that he had identified during his initial reconnaissance. The tunnels connected several buildings in the compound and would allow him to approach the main building from an unexpected direction. The tunnel system was narrow and dark, exactly the kind of environment where Marcus's skills provided maximum advantage. He moved through the passages like water flowing downhill, silent and unstoppable. The tunnels brought him directly beneath the main building, where a service entrance provided access to the structure's interior. Marcus emerged from the tunnels inside the main building, in a basement area filled with mechanical equipment and storage rooms. The building's interior was dark and quiet, suggesting that most of the guards were still outside dealing with the fuel storage situation. But Marcus wasn't alone in the building. He could hear movement on the floors above him, and the sound patterns suggested at least 6 guards were maintaining security inside the structure. These guards would be the most elite members of the team, selected to protect whatever was being kept in the building. Marcus began his systematic elimination of the interior guards, using techniques that were perfectly suited to the confined spaces and multiple levels of the building. The first guard was eliminated in a storage room on the basement level, rendered unconscious by a sleeper hold that left no trace of violence. The second and third guards were patrolling the first floor together, moving through a series of offices and conference rooms. Marcus stalked them through the building's ventilation system, observing their patrol pattern and identifying the moment when they would be most vulnerable. When the guards separated to check different rooms, Marcus struck simultaneously. The first guard was eliminated with a pressure point technique that caused immediate unconsciousness, while the second guard was rendered unconscious by a precisely applied chokehold. 31 guards eliminated. 19 remained. The fourth guard was stationed at a stairwell that provided access to the building's upper floors. This guard was alert and professional, positioned where he could observe multiple approach routes while maintaining radio silence with his colleagues outside. Marcus approached through the building's air handling system, emerging from a ventilation grate directly behind the guard's position. The elimination was swift and silent, adding another unconscious guard to Marcus's tally. 32 guards eliminated. 18 remained. The fifth and sixth guards were positioned on the second floor, near what appeared to be a secure conference room or command center. These guards were the most experienced and dangerous opponents Marcus had faced, moving with the precision and awareness of elite special forces operators. Marcus spent 20 minutes observing these guards before making his move. He used the building's structure against them, creating sounds and movements that drew their attention while he positioned himself for a simultaneous attack on both targets. The elimination required perfect timing and flawless execution.
Marcus struck both guards within seconds of each other, using techniques that rendered them unconscious without giving either man time to alert his colleagues or activate any alarm systems. 34 guards eliminated.
16 remained. Marcus had now eliminated more than 2/3 of the original guard force, but the most dangerous phase of his mission was still ahead. The remaining 16 guards were the most experienced and capable members of the team, and they were now fully aware that they were facing an opponent unlike anything they had encountered before. The secure conference room on the second floor contained the answers Marcus had been seeking. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, and multiple monitors displayed what appeared to be surveillance footage from locations around the world. Most importantly, a large map on one wall showed the locations of intelligence operatives from multiple countries, including several names that Marcus recognized. This wasn't about Dr. Elena Volkov at all. The kidnapping had been a fabrication designed to lure Marcus into a trap where he could be eliminated or captured. Someone had compiled detailed intelligence about his methods, capabilities, and psychology, then created a scenario specifically designed to test those abilities under extreme conditions. But why? The answer came to Marcus as he studied the surveillance monitors and recognized several faces from his own intelligence organization. This was an evaluation, a test, designed to determine whether Marcus's old-school methods were still relevant in an age of technological warfare. The irony was unmistakable. In trying to prove that Marcus was obsolete, his opponents had actually demonstrated that his skills were more valuable than ever. The first 4 highly trained guards had been eliminated without firing a shot, without using any electronic equipment, and without causing any permanent injuries. Marcus was about to leave the conference room when he heard footsteps on the stairs below. The remaining 16 guards had realized that their colleagues inside the building were no longer responding to signals, and they were moving to investigate. The final confrontation was about to begin, but Marcus was no longer the hunted. He had become the hunter, and the 16 remaining guards were walking into a building that he now controlled completely. Marcus positioned himself at the top of the stairwell and waited. His grandfather had taught him that the key to victory was not strength or speed, but patience and understanding. The guards below were brave and skilled, but they were thinking like soldiers storming a building. Marcus was thinking like the building itself, knowing every shadow, understanding every sound, and controlling every advantage. The last 16 guards entered the building with military precision, but they were entering Marcus Chen's domain. And in that domain, old-school skills had never been obsolete. When the sun rose over the compound 6 hours later, 50 guards lay unconscious but unharmed throughout the facility. None had been killed, none had been seriously injured, but all had been systematically outmaneuvered by a single operative who had proven that sometimes the oldest methods are still the most effective. Marcus walked out of the compound as the first helicopter appeared on the horizon, carrying Director Walsh and a team of investigators who would spend weeks trying to understand exactly how one man had defeated an entire military unit without firing a single shot. The mission that was supposed to prove Marcus Chen was obsolete had instead demonstrated that he represented the future of intelligence operations. In a world where technology could fail, be compromised, or be turned against its users, there would always be a place for someone who understood that the most sophisticated weapon ever created was a properly trained human mind. Marcus never learned who had orchestrated the test or why they had chosen him for evaluation. But he never forgot the night when technology failed and skill took over, proving that some things never become obsolete,